Meg here. We're going to talk today about the first of the 4 planning questions that I introduced yesterday when you're planning your presentation. And the first question is, what do I know or can I maybe guess about who's going to be listening to my presentation? There's 3 bits that I would like you to think about, one of which I wrote about in quite a lot of detail in the book, and 2 I think I have more of an understanding of since the book came out. First aspect is, as soon as you start thinking about a group that has more than 4 people, you begin to really see that there are subgroups within that group. So if you could divide the group up and get them to stand on one side, stand on another, stand in various places, the group would get remixed and remixed and remixed. So people who do a certain job role, architects stand here, building managers stand here, facilities managers stand here, building owners stand here, and people would stand in different groups. But as soon as you were to remix them by levels of seniority, that would change the thing by where they're from, by whether they belong to organisations that believe in radical change or whether they belong to organisations that believe in incremental political lobbying. Things are going to change and change and change. So one of the really practical things that you can do is to think about those subgroups and then go through the rest of the questions, actions, past, important, as I explained in the previous video, and are going to go into more detail in the later videos, for those subgroups. And then the more you can do that, the more you're going to be able to be more subtle, be more nuanced in your ability to capture people's attention. And people say to me often, like, oh, but I've got a mixed group and some people are really expert and some people aren't, or there's some people who have loads of experience and some people have really little, or they have loads of different perspectives. That's almost always true. Even a group that appears homogenous from the outside, when you go inside, has almost infinite variety. And so you're able to, let me say that again, a group that appears homogenous on the outside, from the inside has almost infinite variety. And so every group is mixed. So your job always as a subtle, nuanced presenter that is to create a presentation which captures people. And sometimes we're not thinking about that at the moment, but sometimes during the presentation you might overtly name those groups and sometimes you might not. So subgroups is the first thing. Second thing is to not make assumptions, and I think I've learned a lot more about this in the past 4 years, that lots of people have aspects of their identity that are not obvious when you look from the outside. Some people have invisible conditions, some people have disabilities that are not visible, which can affect all sorts of things. Some people may be lip reading you, some people may not be able to see the things you're doing or the visual aids that you're using. Some people have different genders than you think they have. Lots of people, in fact, a few months ago, you would have thought I was a different gender than I am. And some people still think I'm a different gender than I am. And so to not make assumptions about that, people's sexualities can not be obvious to you. People's religions, where they're from, can be not immediately obvious. And so you have to assume that there are people in your group who are neurodiverse, autistic, dyslexic, or other things. You have to assume that there are people in your group who have invisible conditions or disabilities. You have to assume that there are people who are queer or LGBTQ. You have to assume that people are, you have some trans people or non-binary people in your group, and so on and so on. So you have to assume that not everyone is, unless you know them, not everyone is from the country you think they're from. Not everyone maybe speaks the type of English that you speak. And so the more that you can make those assumptions, the more people who have those as part of their identity feel so much more welcome. And otherwise what happens is you can make blanket statements which then mean that some people feel pushed to the edges or unseen. It's really important. Also, assumptions around energy level, around assumptions around ability, assumptions around the way people's lives work. When you're doing a presentation, the kind of examples and stories you use can really fall flat if you haven't actually made different assumptions. The third thing is connected pretty strongly to that, and that is power differences. So if some aspects of your identity are more supported by society, and you're talking to a group where some people in that group have identities that are more marginalised along those axes, I don't know that there's anything particular I want you to do with that. I just want you to internally acknowledge it. So there are aspects of my identity that are more supported by society. I am white, I am neurotypical, so not autistic, I am able-bodied, and those are identities where I have learnt dominance. Society has taught me dominance, has taught me to be certain of my place in the world on those axes. There are other aspects of your identity potentially that are more marginalised, and if you're talking to a group of people who have identities that are more dominant in the dominant narrative, then I want you to internally acknowledge that and look after that part of yourself. So I'm queer, I'm trans, and standing in front of a group of people who potentially aren't queer and aren't trans, it requires more, more energy than it would take for someone whose identities were more in the dominant narrative. There's lots of education that we can do, and really what we need to be doing is deconstructing those dominant narratives, dominant identities, that learned dominance, that learned oppression, oppressing, and also to find those parts of our identities that are more marginalised and nurture them, find community in them. But that's kind of a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about here. But it is important to acknowledge that experiences differ, and when we're talking in front of a group, we're already given some of the power, and it's important that we use all the axes of our power really wisely. So that's where I want you to think a bit more about people. So think about subgroups, think about not making assumptions and what might be invisible to you, and think about power differences. Next video is about actions, and there's a couple of aspects that we didn't cover about actions, and some kind of subtlety that I don't think was originally in my explanation in the book. So I'll see you in the next video. Click, subscribe, like, or whatever on this video so that you can see some more.